Joining from the NLP Logix AI Collaborate 2022 conference in Ponte Vedra, Florida, we have Doug Leeby and Benjie Hanson of Beeline.
So Doug and Benjie, thanks so much for being able to join us here today.
Thanks for having us, Dan. Great to be here.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, we've got a lot to unpack in terms of your guys' sort of data and AI journey. And before we get into use cases, I wanted to talk about what kicked this journey off. You know, when companies sort of go from a place of maybe storing their data, taking it seriously, to actually trying to get value from their data, that's a very conscious leap. What was the opportunity or the problem that landed on your plate that made you say, you know what, we might want to get started on our AI journey here?
I think we always knew we wanted to get started on the journey. It was just a matter of time based on size of data. So just at a high level, we offer a SaaS platform for workforce management for all labor that's not full-time. Okay, so our clients are all the Fortune 2000, you've heard of many of them, and they bring us in for efficiency, compliance, cost control, but primarily also for visibility. So there's just a great big question mark in terms of who's working for me, how much am I spending, what are their skills, things of that nature. And so over the years, we've been an organization that has known that we need to evolve to be a data company, but maybe we didn't have enough data, or nor did we necessarily have the in-house acumen to leverage it appropriately. So as you can imagine, with a typical SaaS platform, we provide reporting and analytics. But Dan, we have over $55 billion of spend going through our system each and every year. And so when you think about that massive data and the multitude of signals that we're able to capture and discern, it's pretty interesting to think that the play in our industry can shift from sort of the typical software play to a data play. And I'll let Benjie jump in as well, because he runs our data and analytics team, has been instrumental in our journey. And again, we're early days. I think it's ingenuous for a lot of companies to run out there and say that they're AI driven. We're not. I don't think anybody in my industry is, but we have a massive data set, so we're probably best positioned. And now it's about trying to find ways to provide more value to our clients and some of the other constituents. But Benjie was actually a client, so you have a dual perspective here, and I'll turn over to you and let you share.
Yeah, no, it's over the last 11 years at Beeline, it's been amazing seeing the growth and how we've started to utilize data in a much more thoughtful and deliberate way. But at the end of the day, our industry is all about bringing the right talent to the right companies, right? So we're highly focused on giving great opportunities to talent and enabling our clients to benefit from that. And there's millions of transactions that occur in that whole process. So as a client, you typically are thinking from an HR procurement perspective of, I need a body and I receive a body from the supply chain, but it's far deeper than that, right? People are not pencils. There's such variation, and the data tells that story. You know, a project manager is just a project manager until you start looking underneath the covers. Well, they're in the healthcare space. They have attributes of skills, experience. So that talent tells a much bigger story. And what we're starting to really try to benefit from and utilize is how can we look at both the cost as well as the quality of the resource itself and bring talent to our clients in an easy way. So one of those examples that I think we're really providing some benefit is a product called Smart Buyer. And from a client perspective, that's exactly the kind of thing that I wanted when I was sitting on the client side itself, is how can I make my end customers, and coming from procurement perspective, a better buyer, and utilizing Beeline's massive data set and number of transactions that are going through our system. And so that use case became, what used to be very tactical. Here's a rate, here's a location, here's a rate card, things that aren't very smart. And what we've evolved to in Smart Buyer is looking at the big picture. Where is talent located? What kind of buyer are you, right? Are you a smart buyer where you have a lot of experience, or do you need some help? How can we present data at the right time to give you a better experience and hire the right talent at the best market available cost itself?
And Benjie, would it be fair to say, you were a client, so traditionally when we talk about visibility, we were providing reporting and analytics, which were still, I would say at the time, best in class, but we tried to go a step further. So then we introduced visualizations, which was helpful. And then we brought what we call Did You Know? So Dan, when we think about the evolution, the Did You Know might be discerning data from that program or the market and teeing that up informationally at decision points for our buyers, like Benjie, which is great, but it's still not enough because there's just so many variables. And we often talk at Beeline in terms of the resume is dead or it should be dead, and job descriptions that are typically generated from systems such as ours and job boards. They're just not very good, right? There's so much more nuance to it. And especially in our industry, I think you can appreciate the need for human intervention and vetting. And so we don't pretend for a moment that we won't need humans involved, but if we can take away a lot of the noise on the front end and help our buyers understand what smart buying behavior looks like in their organization based on what great outcomes they've had in the past, then we can work that backwards and inform them, whether that's geographical choices or skill set choices or whatever the case may be, so that we can accelerate the time from being what we call kind of a naive buyer to a more savvy buyer.
Got it. And there's a lot that undergirds sort of this initial product that you're talking about here. And I'm going to sort of try to nutshell our first question and then make our transition to our second one. You guys have put a lot of good stuff on the table here. So it sounds as though there was an understanding that you could drive more value for the customer with AI if you could do a better job at a very high level. Tell me if this is a good synopsis or a bad synopsis. At a high level, there is a matching play here, and it's not as simple as people or pencils as you've articulated. There's a lot of nuance to who's the right person and what's the best way to optimize for that right person at the right cost at the right time, and that your thought was there's a kind of recommendation matching play that could be a much better efficiency all around, a much better value for our customer, but much better fit for the talent if we had AI that could help with that matching. Is that the right way to summarize the big insight that drove you here, or is there something else I should be putting on the table?
No, I think it is. It is very much a matching exercise and looking at data from across clients, right? So as the example I used earlier, right, a project manager, when you drill down into the model further, right, you start looking at attributes associated to that project manager. Skills, right, or would be the most common task. A project manager would have PMP certifications, right? They may have an industry-specific skill set, or maybe they're a technology PM versus a practical PM. And then there's locations that go into that as well. And then buying behavior on top of that, how the client's actually purchasing. What you'll find is most folks will say, I need a Doug Leeby, right? Well, there's only one Doug Leeby. There is a world of experience and skills. But if I look at Doug's experience in history, right? CEO, right? In technology and varying attributes, right? Java developer is a more simplistic version of that. Just saying Java developer is not sufficient enough. But what actually is the sub skill set there? And we see it a lot in the IT space. So spending a lot of time in matching and understanding what the necessary skills are versus what are the full laundry list. And Doug said it very well, right? The resume is dead. Well, job descriptions are dead as well. And you're really utilizing, buying behavior and actually what is meeting the job skill, what had a positive end in that assignment or that worker's engagement is super helpful to continually processing and evolving that.
Yeah, I mean, well, and this sort of begs the question, if the job description is dead and or the resume is dead, what are the factors that are taking its place? You started to hint at a few of them, but as somebody not necessarily in your industry, and many of our listeners maybe are not, certainly they might use your industry, but they're not in it. The things that come to mind about somebody's experience might have to do with, if I'm thinking off the resume, I'm thinking about drinking in their LinkedIn profile and maybe other social elements about them or other personality scoring factors. I have no idea, but there's something more important than the resume that I want to look at. I wonder what those data sources damn well are. And then similarly about the job description, it might be the only place where we have a real encapsulation of here are the outcomes we are looking for. But you would just kind of hinted at, maybe we can quantify who did well or did not do well as a salesperson, as a project manager, as a a shelf stocker, whatever the case may be. And maybe we can just look at those quantifiable elements as opposed to this big goofy paragraph about what success in the job looks like. Can we talk a little bit about what are the new data sources on the resume side that are going to replace it? What are the new data sources on the job description side that are going to replace it? Because I think this is a really big paradigm shift for some of the listeners.
And I think we want to be clear when we say job descriptions are dead. I guess what we're really saying is they're antiquated and they need to be augmented. We can give you a good example of a client we were working with, and Benjie hit it with a project manager. But when we looked at the buying behavior of what a project manager brought into the organization, we found that they actually were hiring 5 different types of people, believe it or not, even help desk, right? So Dan, it goes back to what you just said about it being at a very high level from a job description perspective. And so the point is, we need to get a little bit more personal based on buying behavior of the past to say, all right, when Dan's asking for a project manager, it looks like this versus when Doug is, right? So we might drop these skill attributes on the job description on yours, and we may add them to mine, etc. So doing a better job with the job description and making it more personal to the individual and the organization is step one. I think from the talent perspective, we do believe that folks look primarily at hard skills, which is important, but there are the soft skills and the psychometrics and some of these other attributes that you can start to bring in. Maybe time and experience in a particular industry, for example. That's usually on a resume, but it's not necessarily presented or weighted the way perhaps it would be in a conventional evaluation process. So I think, for us, we're just looking at all these different data signals and striving to ensure that we can personalize it so that every buyer, every worker does indeed end up with a good match, like you said.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, it's not necessarily like, okay, we can just throw all of our resumes out. It's more of, hey, let's think about what are the true better proxies for performance and fit for this role. And let's make sure that those are getting rolled into our decision making. It sounds like that's the more accurate way of representing this transformation.
I love that. I think you hit it dead on.
Okay, cool. Fantastic. So, all right, great. Well, we've talked a little bit about sort of this initial product that you folks are sort of developing here on this journey to becoming data-driven, which is indeed a journey. Many folks, as you've mentioned in your industry, probably haven't even started yet. We can go a little bit more into this particular use case here and get an understanding of what this looks like from an end user perspective. So I'm kind of imagining, folks are switching over from just matching of resume, people as pencils, kind of an algorithm, which maybe is just an if-then set of statements, to this more robust, rich, informed perspective on matching. When it comes to the customer's experience, I imagine maybe they do have a dashboard with you guys, but I presume most of the complexity on the data science side is on your side. What is the before and after experience for your customers before this kind of matching existed, as opposed to, let's say, now when we have some of this stuff in the mix?
Yeah, well, end user experience is paramount to everything that we develop at Beeline, right? We certainly want to do as much as of the old adage of, looking like a goose, right? Smooth on top, paddling like crazy underneath, right? To make sure that we're providing that ease of use. So amongst all the complexity of the data model with Smart Buyer and other types of tools, the presentation actually to the end user is far simplistic. It's more guided. It's designed to nudge or coach a buyer along when they're hiring. We certainly don't want to overly stress a hiring manager who, at the end of the day, hiring managers looking for a Java developer, PM, aren't generally real concerned about corporate policy, procurement behavior being one of those. They just need to build widgets. And so the experience of going into our environment is very much like form filling out, right? I need a PM with these attributes, these particular rates, go, right? And it distributes out to the supply chain who present candidates and resumes who are reviewed and ultimately fulfilled. What Smart Buyer does is it takes another approach and says, okay, you want to hire someone, tell me what you're looking for. And it starts opening up a comparative window and say, okay, great, you want a PM with these particular attributes and skill sets. Hey, does it matter where the location is? Because you could actually improve your time to fill and get folks faster. But there may be an impact to cost, or you're really concerned about budget and cost factors. Okay, well then maybe you want to reverse that position. If you remove some of these skills that you may or may not need, there's also another opportunity to improve both rate as well as fillability of those resources. So we're spending a lot of time in saying, look, you can do anything you want. You may be really good at hiring. You may be the first time coming into our environment. We're going to give you options that will get you to the end goal of the right talent at the right price and filled within a timeline that meets your needs. So that whole experience is just a few clicks where we're presenting a whole lot of information from what is a more complex model underneath of the covers and making for a better experience and hopefully a better end result for the overall client organization.
But I think what you said is key, because we also share what we predict the end result to look like, Dan. So to your question earlier, it would be, to Benjie's point, form fill. Here's a job description. Here's a time. Here's the amount I'm willing to pay. Click the button. Wait for the talent to come in. Now, and to Benjie's point, a very gentle, most behavioral economics nudge perspective. We say, hey, Dan, you can go down that road, but we're going to manifest on screen very elegantly and beautifully this notion that if you just click this button and this button and this button, the outcome will look different. So perhaps time to fill will be shorter. Perhaps the cost will be less. Maybe it'll be more, but maybe the skills will be higher, right? So you start to get a glimpse of what success will look like if you'll just follow our guide. And then that accelerates the process and leads to those better outcomes that we're trying to provide for our clients.
Got it. Okay. So the ability to certainly keep things simple on their side. They're not going to want to, do the Python programming here to level up their experience. They just want to click some buttons and have a better match and have that be, hopefully more optimized thanks to AI. But what you're also saying is there might be some recommendations around prompts eventually. I take it this is kind of on the roadmap somewhere. We might want to level it up so that when they tweak a couple settings, we can say, hey, you might actually get this many more potential candidates if we changed our pricing, if we changed our geo regions, if we changed whatever.
That's it. In fact, that's there today, right? That is smart buyer. But and you nailed it. We change a few prompts, then we expand our geography, for example, and all of a sudden we see that we have more talent available to us as one example.
Yeah, and this is interesting. I mean, I've hired on LinkedIn, which is clearly very different than what you guys do, working with the kinds of companies you work with. But they have some rough proxies for this, right? If you're spending this amount per day, here's how many candidates we think we're going to be able to put in front of you in a 30-day period. If you are spending this amount, then we think it's going to be this. Et cetera, changing some of the requirements around skill sets, et cetera, how that would move things up or down, being able to make projections. I could see how if that's helpful for small business, it's got to be helpful for big businesses with gigantic expenses for talent. And so a lot of the complexity is obviously being managed by you guys. The customers hopefully will get the smoother experience. And this is part of a kind of bigger journey for leveling up your whole industry. I think it seems safe to say that in your space, 5 years from now, it's going to be a bit of a different world. And of course, you're trying to stay ahead of that curve right now. And you're both working on exactly that. When we think about these initial capabilities you've built, some of these initial corpuses of data you've started to wrap your arms around and start to leverage in a productive way, what are the future capabilities that this is building up to? What's kind of the vision or the zeitgeist that you guys are headed into that you think is really going to help to transform the company that you're building up into, so to speak?
Great question. I think to your point, we're early days of this and we're talking about matching. But for me, the real nirvana is when we're able to also predict need. And maybe not with 100% accuracy, but if I could come to you and say, Dan, every November, December, you typically hire this type of person, and don't wait for you to get into the system to do that, but perhaps I tee these types of people up and I actually build a stable of talent that you can utilize on demand. Now, maybe you'll exercise that right, maybe you won't. But for me, it's interesting to think about being able to go into a system, having the system know me almost better than I know myself, and not only identify what my needs are, but present solutions as well. So tying it all together, and of course, in our world, we have other constituents than our client. We have the talent, the workers themselves, and we also have suppliers. So combining all this data into the data lake in an unstructured fashion and working with people such as NLP Logix and gaining these insights will provide us the opportunity to provide a much more valuable solution like the one I just described.
Got it. And in terms of, I guess I'm imagining myself as a future user of yours. Maybe as soon as I log in, there's already some kind of a a read or a pulse or a supposition around what I might want to hire for. Maybe there's some context around seasonality and knowing that I'm going to need more of these people, less of these people. And maybe there's recommendations for types of listings that I could run based on what those presumptive needs are. Is this the right picture, or are there some other tangible ones you can put in front of us here that might help the listeners to see a mental picture?
I think that's right. I was just going one step further, saying not only am I trying to identify your need, but I'm also bringing you people that would be good fits. Right now, you have to sit there and say, oh, geez, I need this project manager for this month. I'm going to go in the system. I'm going to create the job requisition. I'm going to send it out and wait. I'm suggesting tomorrow you turn on Beeline and it says, hey, I already know that you're looking for these project managers. And here's Benjie, and here's Dave, and here's Beth, and here's Sue. Take a look at them. What do you think? And 1 or 2 clicks, and now we're interviewing.
Got it. Okay. And there's another part of this. You just brought up something important that I think maybe certain industries deal less with, this platform dynamic that you folks deal with. You have the folks who buy from you, and then you have the human beings who are going out and working at these companies. And that's a whole party that many organizations aren't necessarily juggling with. When you think about where AI and data improves the experience for the talent themselves, what does that look like? Does that look like maybe finding the types of projects they've historically enjoyed or performed well at and doing a better job of matching them there? Does that find companies that match their personal values? What does that imply, I guess, from the perspective of talent? Because you have so many people at your fingertips there. Where does data and AI, I guess, fit into their experience in addition to your customers?
I love where you're going, Dan. You're speaking our language. We just recently made an acquisition of a worthy competitor. Just a few weeks ago, we announced that. But it speaks really to what you're talking about. Is traditionally our industry has only been focused on a simple procurement tool, really, right? I need a body, you give me a body, and there's suppliers and talent associated with it. But it's actually much bigger than that, right? We made the deliberate decision a number of years ago to become a true platform. And so that investment starts bringing out the talent into its own ecosystem, the supply chain, all of the suppliers that help us find talent into its own ecosystem. So if you imagine the world as a triangle, we've only been doing one part of that. In not so distant future, we'll actually have 3 separate and very distinct components. And so you're right, the talent itself, critically important. What we want to hear from the talent, one, we know that they want to control their own data, right? And have a very secure environment to do that. But they also want an experience. They want to be able to provide feedback of, hey, it was great working for XYZ company, or have an overall, history, because many contractors redeploy at multiples of our clients. And so being able to look at that history and all of that rich data that comes from a long relationship with the talent itself. And then certainly, right, that informs how we get better skills, better validation of education, right, location preferences, diversity and inclusion, and also gives the talent the ability to understand their environment in which they're going to go into, which I think will result into better engagements with the clients when they're more participatory, I should say, in the process. Suppliers, same thing, right? Suppliers attract talent and on behalf of companies they're working with, do preliminary interviews. They have all different types of performance measures. And the suppliers are critically important as well. And also there's a lot of rich data there on how that supplier performs and how they can do better, or where they can get more opportunities or have better opportunity to complete a transaction. So it's really exciting where we're going. The next time hopefully we get an opportunity to talk will be, very much specific into where this ecosystem is going and the value of all of the data that we have in each of those individual pockets.
Yeah, I'm almost imagining a future on some level, and I would love for you guys to add some color to this, because this is just a very rough idea to kind of plop down, but you folks have a better idea of where it's headed. I see a world where, as somebody doing the hiring, I might be able to look at a slew of candidates that, on a scale of red, yellow, green, are really most close to kind of a perfect green for my job in terms of a combination of factors that I decide on: pricing, talent, performance, whatever the case may be. And I can pretty much filter myself quite quickly here for folks that are green. And I can know who's a yellow and why, and I can know who's a red and why. And I can hopefully make slightly smarter decisions. Similarly, there almost seems like there's the same thing for the talent, where the talent can look at all the places that are soliciting them or all the places that have open positions. And the talent can match themselves based on what they would be paid, based on their geographic preferences, based on company value preferences, based on types of day-to-day work at these projects that they've enjoyed or not enjoyed. And it's almost like both sides of the marketplace can find that sweet spot of green more automatically. This is a bit of an oversimplification, but let me know what kind of detail you guys want to add to this. It's almost what's coming to my mind as you're talking today.
I think you're exactly right. I think the only nuance I would add to, if I'm the talent or the worker seeking a green partnership, one of the areas I think we need to do a little bit better job on is exposing them to culture. And by culture, I actually mean the hiring manager, right? So I may work for Amazon and have an amazing culture, or Southwest Airlines, yet I may be a jerky manager, right? So from a worker perspective, that may seem like an opportunity of a lifetime to associate myself with a brand of that caliber. But it'd be interesting to have that two-way feedback. And so we've been asking our clients for the last several years to enable the workers themselves to rate folks, because that's an early warning signal as well for the organization to understand how you're being represented to the external workforce, part of your brand. It's an extension, right? So I think you've hit it. I just think we can go a little bit further in terms of helping the talent understand not only the right job opportunities and the companies and the logos and the geographies, but also the right people. And that's where some of the psychometrics come into play, which I think are completely underutilized today, but won't be in the future.
We have enough time to kind of end on this. So I really do want to get under the hood there, because you're bringing up clearly a very important factor. I mean, it's said all the time to the point where it's almost like a truism that, people join a company and they leave a boss or a manager. And so clearly your experience and your chemistry, your day-to-day with whoever you're working under is a massive factor as to how well you'll perform and how well you'll feel like it's a fit and how much you'll enjoy your job. So I'm wondering, is it already the case that psychometrics for the manager of so you got thousands of companies that are listing positions with you. Do they all have the manager listed and some psychometric Big Five score of that manager listed? Because if they didn't, it would seem as though you would have to kind of add that, and hopefully it's not too much friction, but you have to add that to your listing process in order to then be able to match that correlatively with whoever these applicants are. Give us a sense of what kind of change needs to happen to make psychometrics and manager matching come to life.
Well, what I'd like to see happen, there's some pretty slick tools out there that can be run in literally, from a visual perspective, a couple minutes. So if I were running a large company that was hiring a lot of externals, I would ask all of my hiring managers to go through that. And all this is a styles profile, right? It's not going that deep, but the lines of Strength Finders or Myers-Briggs or the different 4 quadrants that are out there. And then what you can do is basically in the interview or prior to the interview process, ask the candidate to do the same thing. Or maybe you wait to have the top 2 candidates. And then what you can start to do is look and see if there are style similarities or dissimilarities. And you don't always have to be similar. But if I'm very detail oriented and Benjie, my candidate, is not, that would be good for me to know, because that could be a source of friction. It could be a great source of me hiring diversity as well. So you can see the pros and the cons from it. But truthfully, Dan, organizations are not doing this at scale, especially for the external workforce. So they may be doing it for full-time employees, but we have to stop segregating the full-time from the non-full-time as badly as we do today and realize talent is talent is talent, and adopt some of the same practices that we see in the full-time side.
Got it. And do you see the psychometric element as being essentially inevitable in the coming years in your industry? In other words, everybody understands this, or are you guys sort of lone rangers in terms of really being champions of this psychometric element moving forward?
I think we're definitely lone rangers at this point.
Wow. All right.
Yeah, I firmly believe in it. And I think, like everything in this industry, it'll probably take 5 or 10 years and we'll have some early adopters. But it just makes too much sense to ignore.
That's cool. Well, at least it gives the listeners a little bit of an idea of where the future might go. Obviously, you guys are up close and personal to where this place is transitioning. I think there's probably many, many people who showed up to a manager that was very different than they were expecting, who would hope to have that kind of filtering ability on their side. So I can certainly see the merit to it on my end as well. And I know, gentlemen, that's all we had for time, but I appreciate you being able to both share your perspective on where AI is adding value today and into the future. Thank you so much for being with us.
Dan, it's a pleasure. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Dan.
For more in this series, visit nlplogix.com. That's Logix with an X.